All right, excellent. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I'm sure we'll have some more folks coming in as well. Thanks for coming to our first of our InterActions series of programs. My name is Kisa Harley, and I'm the Education and Curatorial Initiatives Manager at Hanford Mills Museum. And before we get started, I just want to direct you to the Q&A button that you should see at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, try moving your mouse around just a little bit and it should appear. And that is the button you can use to submit questions. We'll have some time for questions and discussion at the end of the program. And since this is a virtual program, some of you may not have been to Hanford Mills. So I just want to do a very brief introduction. We are a historic site. We're located in East Meredith, New York, about 10 miles east of Oneonta, for folks who are familiar with the geography of New York State, we're on kind of the eastern central part of New York. The sawmill here was built in 1846, and the business continued to operate until the mid-1960s. And the greatest expansions took place between 1860 and 1990 under DJ Hanford and his sons Will and Horace, which is why we have named the museum the Hanford Mills Museum. The site included a grist mill, woodworking shops, and a retail shop business, and the family also operated a dairy farm on the land connected to the property. And Hanford Mills today is a historic mill site, and we still use a water wheel and steam plants to run sawmill, grist mill, and woodworking machines. This mission that you see here on the screen is new to us, not as new as it used to be, but as of 2010, with a new focus on sustainability and how that interplays with what happened historically and what we still do at the mill. And we're usually open between mid-May and mid-October for our season. And then in the winter, we usually open back up in February for a day for our Ice Harvest Festival, which this year was virtual. And now I'm going to turn things over to Liz Callahan, our Executive Director, to start tonight's program.
Thank you, Kisa. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this evening too. I would like to welcome our presenters and thank a few folks for making the InterActions series possible. We have two really fantastic presenters tonight, and we'll start by welcoming them. Dr. Rachel Leibowitz is an assistant professor at the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse and the co-director of the Center for Cultural Landscape Preservation there. She specializes in cultural landscape studies, history of the built environment, and historic preservation and public history. And I'm going to take some liberties and paraphrase a statement Dr. Leibowitz has online. She talks about cultural landscapes preservation and how it recognizes the significance of our past relationships with the environment while focusing on present conditions and planning for the future. And I thought this statement really paralleled nicely with Hanford Mills Museum's mission, our goals for the InterAction series, and our interpretation, especially where we are moving our interpretation as a historic site, where we focus on how we learn from the mill's use of natural resources, think about our own use of natural resources, and really try to look at these two steps in the context of how it informs future use of natural resources. So I think it's very exciting to have Rachel with us, and what she does is going to dovetail nicely with what the mill is all about. And I will note that she earned her PhD from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, excuse me. Christina Hunt Wood is a video artist and photographer and the co-owner of Muddy River Hops, a small hops farm and New York State Farm Brewery located in Unadilla, not too far from East Meredith. She's a neighbor of the museum. And Christina, are you on the Delaware County side of Unadilla? Yes, so she
officially
is
Sydney, but
okay,
Unadilla is the address.
Resident of Delaware County as well, where the museum is located. Christina is a virtual artist whose work explores her local environment, rural culture, and race. And she's also the founding member and creative director of Get Woke film series and conversations on race. And she's a marketing manager at Sportsfield Specialties in Delhi. She's pretty busy. Christina has exhibited in galleries and museums throughout the Northeast with a recent solo exhibition at the Fenimore Art Museum in Cooperstown. She's earned an MFA in visual arts from Leslie Art and Design and her BA in studio art from Hobart William Smith College. So we welcome both of you and look forward to hearing how you interpret our efforts at InterActions on environmental justice. In the meantime, I'd also like to take a few seconds to thank people who have made this program possible. The series of InterActions is funded by the Greater Hudson Heritage Network's Creativity Incubator grants through the New York State Council on the Arts. And we are greatly honored to have funding through the Creativity Incubator to really encourage thinking around these issues. We've been able to really pull these great programs together with the support of Dr. Will Walker at the Cooperstown Graduate Program. He's going to be joining us for the discussion afterwards, and with some of the students who have participated in the process. One of the students graduated last year, a CGP student named Kirby Sandriel, and she really helped to pull things together along with Sarah Grantham, another student who was one of our interns at Hanford Mills. And this year, Anna Membrino and Shia Muggan picked up what Kirby and Sarah had started and really ran with it and have helped us to bring this series to fruition. So I'd like to thank all of them. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Okay, now, forgive me. We flipped a coin yesterday. We didn't really flip a coin, but we decided who was going first. Kisa, would you like to remind me who was going first? Because I didn't write it down. Christina is going first. Thank you. Welcome, Christina.
I'm just going to quick get myself set up. You guys can see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to thank you all for coming out this evening, and thank you, Liz and Kisa, Will, and the Hanford Mills and CPG communities for inviting me to talk about my work. I'm going to start with a little background about my life. That's me, the little child in the slides. I am biracial, African and European American. I am the 6th generation in my family to live in the Delaware County area. It's the white European side that is from this rural region. And that's my grandmother, who has taken us on the Archaeological train in 1983, apparently, which is scrawled on the photograph. Delaware County, I think a lot of people are probably local, but I will talk a little bit about the geography. It is officially sort of in the northernmost point of Appalachia. So we are kind of tucked right here. This whole sector is like Otsego County and Delaware County, and we're considered from that socioeconomic point of view to be Appalachian. So a rural, white, quite a bit of poverty. And another little historical bit about the county is that it was at the center of the anti-rent war activity in the mid-1800s. And there was a conflict where tenant farmers were resisting against oppressive landlords and high taxes, and they demanded reform. It led to the undersheriff being murdered, and then all the male farmers were rounded up and put in a stockade in the square at Delhi, which is where I live right now. I actually live in Meredith, which is the same town as East Meredith, but I'm like a mile over the border to Delhi. Delaware County is also home of 2 of the 6 reservoirs that make up the New York City watershed. part of that relationship is the strict land use rules that limit ownership, limit development. The New York State watershed does not pay taxes on that land, but there is sort of some reciprocal benefits. So, for example, if you were to get your septic redone, you could get subsidies to fund that, and a lot of farmers get a lot of subsidies from the watershed. Another benefit is that the land that is in the watershed is like untouched. It stays healthy for farming, for hunting, for fishing, for hiking, and all of these things. But there is this kind of like underlying hostility that you will hear from a lot of locals that is about this outside land control, and it's sort of similar to this anti-rent argument of like the outsiders telling people what to do, who are living in the land, on the land. And let me go back a second. So there has been this like culture of rebellion that like, you can't tell me what I can and I can't do. Libertarian kind of mindset that happens in the region. And, in that come, there's a lot that like, the desire for freedom sometimes comes with like unexpected consequences. And not paying taxes means like defunding your education. Refusing gun regulations can mean having some of the highest gun death rates in your county. There's a rugged individualism and there's racial resentment. So people, often, they're voting against sometimes like their best interests. So healthcare or, education, for example. This is a quick slide from a study done in 2019, but 2018, Delaware County had the highest gun death rate in New York State, and which was at like 13.34 per 100,000 residents. And in 2019, it didn't win the prize, but it is still a contender. As you can see, there's this, dark blue, which indicates that it's a high level. In Delaware County, also, there are lots of just diseases of disparity: alcoholism, drug use, depression, suicide, lack of opportunity in some cases. It's shifting. I think that there are a lot of people coming from outside the area that have moved here to be in more less populated spaces. But there has historically been, it's Appalachia. Let's see what we got here. Another thing, so as I think about all of those pieces, I also think about our rural culture and some of the sort of the smaller expressions of rebellion, not just voting against, making like healthcare for, the welfare queen in Chicago, that, that mythical person or whatever. That there's these minor expressions of power. So drinking and driving and taking the back roads home, throwing the beer can out the window as an expression of rebellion. It's kind of, to me, like when I think about it, it's saying, I'm not going to listen to the laws. I'm not going to listen to the safety, the safety recommendations. And I'm also going to litter, which is in a sense, like owning the land in a way, saying that I can do whatever I want to this land in the smallest, maybe what might feel like the smallest way, but it still is this representation of like peeing on a hydrant, I guess. I don't know. Another symbol that kind of has the same kind of impact, I think, is the Confederate flag, which you can see hanging throughout the county and in other rural spaces around this area, communicating who belongs and who does not belong in the area. So as they say, sometimes people get radicalized. I'm not radicalized, but what the thing that sent me, that shifted my work practice and also just my mentality and gave me a voice that I wasn't using before, was the 2015 massacre at the Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. There, during the civil rights era, South Carolina erected the Confederate flag on their state house as a way to express who was in charge, that white people were still in charge, even if rights were being extended to Black people. And so in 2015, after the massacre, there were these images that were popping up all over social media of Dylan Roof, who was the perpetrator, and he had the Confederate flag. And, South Carolina, people in South Carolina were like, we know what it means. We're done. We want to have it removed. And there was a huge outpouring, protests demanding that it be removed. And it was, there was actually, legislature had removed the flag with a vote of something like 94 to 26 or something like that. So everybody decided that they would take it down. But there was backlash that led locals, even led people in South Carolina to be upset, but also a backlash that expanded throughout the country, including in upstate New York, 850 miles north, where the flags were being hung from barns and billowing off of trucks, and even at our county fair as the centerpiece of this display. As you can imagine, I was quite disturbed by that for a few reasons, but first of all, that my community was rallying behind the Confederacy when our ancestors in upstate New York had likely fought and died to preserve the Union. As a Black person, I was just shocked at how emboldened racists in our community had become. And what might have been the thing, I think it is the thing that really shifted things, was having conversations with my friends, with white friends and family members who, when I shared how disturbing this surge was, kind of suggested, well, it's freedom of speech, Christina, and kind of suggesting that I was overreacting. But in that moment, I could tell that they had no idea what it was like to be Black in the United States. And because this was a threat to me, it was some people telling me now we're telling you who belongs here. And it was very frightening and just not, I just snapped at that point. So this had a major impact on my work. Back here. And so prior to my newest work, I was painting. I was painting these abstract nudes that were loosely based on social issues, but they weren't really, I feel like they weren't very rich and they weren't very deep, but they were, it was what I was doing. And I was also doing a bunch of portraits and such, but I wasn't ever really dealing with my personal realm. I wasn't dealing with issues around place. I wasn't dealing with issues around race. And I actually avoided discussing race. And you can see that in this painting that I'm using yellows and reds, and I don't even know that I was consciously doing it, but I was just not going to have that conversation. As a Black person who grew up in a white space, I had learned that having conversations about race typically just ended badly, so you might as well not. But now I was about to. I was in graduate school when I had a professor who basically encouraged me to look longer than I'm supposed to. As I was telling her stories about my experience in the Confederate flags, and she said, look longer than you're supposed to. And so I did. What I did was I went to the county fair in 2016. That's what this is from. And I also traveled around the county and I documented the flag in all of the spaces that I saw it. Now, these are, photographs, not necessarily for art's sake, but more of documentation and also performance of confrontation. Because each of these, that vendor is coming out to yell at me because she knows why I'm there, right? Because I'm a Black woman taking a picture of the Confederate flag. She said to me at that event, she said, people don't just take pictures of my tent. And I was thinking, we're in an era where everybody has a camera in their hand, and everybody takes pictures of everything. And I knew what it was about. But so I also just drove around and I just, confronting the spaces. You want me to see this? You want me to know what this is? I want it. I'm going to take this with me. I also spent a lot of time researching local history at the Delaware County Historical Association, and collecting things from my grandparents, my white grandparents' home, and photographing other things than things other than Confederate flags. And I really I interviewed a lot of white friends and family members, and they shared stories about race and their throughout history. So stories from the 60s and the 50s, stories from the 90s, and stories from now. And I didn't know what I was going to do with all this information. I was just collecting. And let me see where I am here. And what I found that really interested me was that the mundane was sometimes the most interesting. Words, just words in a obituary. A man of splendid physique and a happy disposition. I mean, that is such a it's about a Black man who had died, and I didn't see people talking about white men dying and how they were just a happy disposition, but this kind of needing to justify that Black man through their physique and their joy, right? I keep hitting the wrong button here. Hold on, bear with me. So that led me to thinking about the mundane. I started really trying to figure out what do we do now? What is the contemporary action that is something that has a cruelty to it that is also overlooked by many, or just not given the attention that maybe it needs, that it is a phenomenon more than just a beer can on the side of the road. And that's when I realized, oh, the road soda. And as a local person, I recall being with friends who would say they're having a drink after work, and cracking open a beer, and nobody's going to tell them what they can and can't do. I've seen it my whole life, and it was not interesting or different or abnormal. It was just what we did as a culture. But when you think about it, like I said earlier, this act really is more loaded than we give it credit. So that is, just the way, it also so represents the beauty and the ugliness in how I look at our rural culture. It's just so, there's just, cool. And so these photos are framed and hung on the wall, or I have a piece that's printed on vinyl floor tile. And this is an image of that. And that can be walked upon, and it comes in various sizes because they're 12 by 12 tiles, and each of them, each time it's installed for the space. So this is, this photograph is something that I found in my grandparents' home. And when I was cleaning out my grandparents' house after my grandfather had passed away, and it was actually hidden in a photo album that was tucked in a closet that seemed like it was being hidden. And I opened it up, and the album had photos of my grandmother in college, and then when she came back to Bloomville and into Delaware County. And that is my grandmother on the far right in the gingham dress. And she is probably the accompanist for the minstrel show. What I think I'm so interested with this photo, well, Robert Wire, I want to give him some credit too. He was a photojournalist from Delaware County who had quite a, he was a professional, and he's well known, has a great collection at the Delaware County Historical Association. But what was so interesting is like thinking about how this act, right? Like this was a very common event. Like minstrel shows through the 40s were like the thing that rural white people did to get together and have a good time and have a fundraiser. And so somewhere, you know, over time, we learned that like there's a cruelty to this and that it's not innocuous. It has a really negative impact. And so we don't do this anymore. And so it kind of, it's like a picture of hope, if you will, you know, like that we can get beyond some of the things that we think are just so rooted in our culture that are just awful. And just so you know how normalized this was, it was a fundraiser for a church, probably the Methodist church, and they raised about $60 for a new furnace. So that is that. I have used that photo in my grandmother's story as a as like the root of a lot of my work. And so I did a 3-part video series that I won't show you parts because I don't have enough time to show you the video, but this is a still from the first piece, which is called Oh, the Measures. And it's based on an interview I did with my mother, where she was telling me that my father, my Black father, who when he first came to visit my grandmother in Stamford, New York, that she was racist, and you know, vocally, and she was really off put by it, and he was very kind of stressed out about it. My mom was stressed out about it, but he ended up like doing cartwheels and was like, "You're just so beautiful, Mrs. Goss," you know, and was like very charming to her. And she softened. And so in this video, it's built in like a silent film genre. So you have the split screen and she's, you know, sizing him up and questioning and not trusting, and he's nervous, but then he does these cartwheels and she softens and is like laughing and having this wonderful time. And then there's some silent film text where she says, "Oh, and what a wonderful physique," and like, "Oh, you're so well spoken." These microaggressions that are used still to this day. And one of the things, the beer can, once again, the road soda comes in as sort of like as punctuation mark. Like it is the exclamation mark that signifies like some of the movements in this video. It's a short video, about 3 minutes long. The second video, this is a terrible reproduction of the still, but it's the second video is from a story that was told to me by a teacher who worked in a school where in the 1990s, and a bunch of white kids decided they were really into the Wu-Tang Clan, and then they were going to sort of start being like the Wu-Tang Clan. You know, they were dressing like, and they were listening to and just putting on, you know, Blackness to an extent. And there was another group that actually called themselves the Hicks, and they were like not in our town. And so there was this, you know, this war against gangs. Like, you know, it could have been, you know, I don't know, you know, they were fighting each other. And eventually the school made the decision to ban Wu-Tang Clan clothes. And like, you know, that was the decision. It was, you know, and I'm sure that the students, the individuals got in trouble a little bit, but like, as far as policy went, it was about like stopping the introduction of Black culture into the community so that it wouldn't trigger problems. And I don't know, when she was telling me that story, I don't think she knew that that's what she was telling me, but I was like, oh, this is fascinating. So I made a short video about that interaction. And the third video in the series, Untitled InterActions, is called County Fair. And it was a contemporary piece that just you know, documented the county fair and all the Confederate flags that were there. And some, you know, some of the normal fair things, you know, workshops and demonstrations and rides, but also the sort of ugliness of the Confederate flag being sort of interjected into this like idyllic event, you know. This is how it was displayed in 2017 at a show in Cambridge. So you can see that the beer cans end up becoming a part of the display. So as I was interacting with the cans, I began like, I always picked up the cans, like I always was like cleaning up after myself when I photographed them. And I had these cans and I would recycle them, but like then I was like, maybe there's something I can do with them that is more that is more than just like recycling. And so I started deconstructing them and came up with this process where I basically just I cut fringe by hand, and it kind of like engages my knitting mind. It's sort of like mindless, and you just keep trimming, and then fixing them onto a wood panel. And to me, I consider them maps because each panel is designed with the cans that are found on a specific road. So so they're named after the road, Sealy Wood Road in Walton. And it's interesting because you really get to know the personalities of people and how they interact with the land. Like that somebody who's drinking Coors Light is driving down Sealy Wood Road and just owning it, like being like, I can do whatever I want to this. And there's somebody loves White Claw on Waterman. So that's that. And that'll give you another angle of. And with this work, I've always like been interested in the idea of awe and resonance as like a way to interact with viewers. And so having something that's shiny and something that looks that draws you in, and then you realize that it's not what you think it is, and it makes you wonder, and then you interact with it longer, and and then you think about like, what are other examples of, okay, so the road soda, like now I know that the road soda is sort of a metaphor for rebellion or for microaggressions. And what other things do we overlook? And I find that people do really think about that. Like, and so like, while my work often it's like a dialogue between myself and people in my rural community in some ways, but it also is meant for like a broader audience and for art world to be able to sort of like reflect, like let's all reflect on the things that we overlook, because we're all doing that. And the tossing of cans is, one can, like I said earlier, is like, it's it may seem like one little act, but when you see the collection, like the collected evidence of an action, you really do see a phenomenon that's a little bit more disturbing than maybe you thought. Let's see here. This is another piece of that, from that kind of a little experimenting, but with faux fur, and thinking about road sodas and roadkill and how they interact with each other. I'm a vegetarian, and I get very sad when I see the animals that are victimized. But and this piece, it may look familiar to you, is from, so I took the photograph from my grandmother's closet, from her photo album, and I turned it into a blanket. And that, I really feel like this photo is, like I say, like it's the thing that brings us to the past, whereas the cans bring us to the present. Like the cans really are about like always reminding us that this is still happening, where this photo is like going to the past. And by transferring the photo to a blanket, I am trying to remind people that it's laying on a couch, and somebody might sit on the couch. Like I showed it at one gallery, and somebody was sitting on the couch, and the gallerist was like, that's part of the show. And they look over and they're like, ooh, like, oh my God, blackface minstrel show, like this is, disturbing. But that's, that's how normal it was. And that's how domestic some of the violences that we, that we place on space, and we put on, it just so normalized. How's my time, by the way? Am I okay?
You're at about 27 minutes.
Okay, so I should be wrapping up here. And these are just a few pictures from the Fenimore show. And there's my husband actually is a hunter, and so the deer head is a rack that is from him hunting. I'm vegetarian, he's a hunter. And some of these things installed in space. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Christina. That was wonderful, really personal and amazing. Rachel, would you like to tell us your story, and then we'll have a conversation all together?
Sure. I'm really excited to have this conversation with all of you and with Christina. We've already spoken a bit about the work, but it's so great to just see it and listen to you talk about it. So I'm really, I almost want to rush through everything so that we can talk more. So let's see here. Can you see that okay? You got the whole screen? Great. And you can hear me? So I want to thank Liz and Kisa and Will. I want to thank Christina for letting me be a part of this conversation. And so sort of as a jumping off point of what Christina was saying, I want to talk a bit about how sometimes what is around us in the landscape, in the built environment, is actually, we're not even seeing it. Either it really is intentionally invisible, or we're just not paying attention. And so first I want to return to my home state of Illinois and give an example. I was going to share with you a project from Chicago in a little neighborhood, but I decided to talk about this instead because I'm from the land of Lincoln. So when I worked at the State Historic Preservation Office back home in Illinois, we were tasked with the responsibility of reviewing for any threats, damage, harm to historic cultural resources, this entire rail corridor from Chicago all the way across the state to St. Louis. This was going to be for high-speed rail. And so the job of the Historic Preservation Office, the staff are supposed to look out for archaeological resources or buildings, historic districts. Even pieces of Route 66 may have been impacted by this. And so we're supposed to just help the railroad avoid these things if it can be avoided. So this was our project, and it came under the Obama administration. It was one of those great transportation, it has to be shovel ready, you know, good, we're doing this quickly. Here's an article that actually was from almost 9 years, about 8-9 years after that project started, where the Wall Street Journal is showing Illinois as kind of like they can't get it together for this project. But part of what they were complaining about in this article is really that it's not going to be fast enough. That was really their point, is that we're spending all this money, but it's not even really all that fast. So their criticism was not about something else, which was really a delay in the office. That it was partially our review. So part of the delay for this project was that in Springfield, the state capital, it was anticipated that when they widened this rail corridor to accommodate these faster speeds of trains, that there would be found archaeological evidence of the Springfield Race Riot, which occurred over 2 days in 1908. And so this is the example I want to give about aspects of our built environment being invisible. So people involved in this project, transportation agencies, whatnot, they were aware of the possibility that we might find historic evidence of this massacre, in essence, is what this was. The idea was, well, it's archaeology. It's not something we see every day, and maybe we can dig it up and we can study these bits and pieces, these fragments of history, and then, the train will move forward. This is a photograph where you can see people who lost everything coming back to the neighborhood and seeing that there's really nothing left. You can see this sort of chimney, this fireplace flue chimney standing here by itself. But this was 48 hours of terror in the state capital of Illinois. Actually, again, it's the home of the great emancipator, Springfield, Illinois. That's the land of Lincoln. We make a lot of money in Illinois on Lincoln tourism, and Springfield especially. It's all about Lincoln. So just to give you a little geography here, this is the old state capitol where Abraham Lincoln gave his House Divided speech. A house divided against itself will not stand. Here, and that's where my office was, actually in the basement of this building. But so these are the areas, the neighborhood where the violence really was thought to have started around here in what was at the time the Levee District, with some bars. But it then went to what was called in the papers at the time, or what some folks, I guess, from outside the neighborhood would call the Badlands. And I want to just digress for a moment here and say that I objected to the use of this term, the Badlands, in these archaeological reports and whatnot. This is a name for this area that came from outside the area. So people living in this neighborhood would never have called it this. They would never say, oh, my name is William and I live in the Badlands. That's just not right. This is a name that outsiders give. But so this is that railroad track here. You can see it very clearly. The red circles are suggestive of Black-owned businesses, Black-owned houses, or other immigrant population houses that were lost in this race riot over these 48 hours. But in particular, I want you to look, if you can see my cursor or my arrow here, these particular dots along this railroad track, because that's what we're focusing on right now. So again, trains got to go fast and they need to widen this corridor. And so they need to do archaeological exploration of what we can't see. And they're thinking, maybe we'll find something, maybe we won't find something. But if we find something, we'll document it, we'll collect it. It can be in museums, and then we'll be good. But I think what's important to understand about the 1908 race riot, and again, people in the community that I spoke to in 2015, 2016, still refer to it as a massacre. It just depends who you're talking to. But we were politely calling it a race riot. And unfortunately, events like this were all too common at this time, all too common in this country. But the thing that was different about the 1908 race riot was that it was happening blocks from Abraham Lincoln's home, and blocks from where he gave that important speech. And the newspapers around the country were saying at the time, if this can happen in Abraham Lincoln's hometown, then what progress have we made? What progress has this country made in terms of race relations? So within 6 months of this event, this August 1908 event, on Lincoln's birthday up here, February 12th, 1909, so 6 months later, the NAACP is formed. So this is their website, the NAACP's website, national, not Springfield. And they are clearly stating on their website, we trace our origins to this historic event in Springfield. So to me, this site that nobody can see and nobody was thinking about, they got to get the trains to go faster, is actually a site of national significance. And so I was called there as the Preservation Services Director. I was the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer, and I got a call from the archaeologist who said, you should come see what we're finding here. And so I came and I saw this. So I showed you that row in particular of red dots I wanted you to pay attention to. This one is the one closest to the intersection. I suppose I could go back if you need me to, but just to say that this was sort of the end of that row of 7 houses. And this is the home of William Hunter, a Black man We know his name. He's not some anonymous person. We know the names of all these people. They were reported in the paper. We can find documentation of who lived where. This gentleman was described in newspaper articles as a cripple. That he was an older man who had very great difficulty walking. He was dragged from his home here. So this is the brick foundation of his home. He was dragged from inside this house by this mob onto these steps and onto this herringbone brick sidewalk, and he was beaten and lynched. And this had been covered by construction fill, when this whole neighborhood was reduced to ash. The city of Springfield just covered it up, and it had been covered up, and the railroad kind of put forward on top of it for decades. It had been this way since 1908. And so when I saw this, I said, I really think it's important that we stop right now. Actually, we need to cover this up. And I don't mean cover, like it's a cover up. What I mean is, let's protect it. We don't want these pieces of our history to be compromised in snow. And we need to figure out what we're going to do here, because this has not been handled appropriately, I thought, by different agencies. I was concerned. So, and I was not alone in my concern, but I was very grateful that other members of the community, archaeologists working on this site, other colleagues in our office, people at the transportation agency, that everybody said, okay, well, let's pause for a moment. And we had a lot of community conversations, a lot of discussion of how do we move forward with this. And this is just to say that it took years. It took years of difficult conversation, and there were delays, and there were people who were very frustrated by this, because the other towns along this rail corridor were like, when is this? You're ruining the whole line here. We've got to get these trains going, and why are we waiting? But we recognized in these conversations that this, first of all, it was invisible to some people, but it was very visible always to other people. They had never forgotten this event, because this was something that happened to their relatives, to their family members, to their ancestors. They had not stopped telling these stories, even if other people in the community were not listening to these stories. But it was clear to all of us, with this connection to the formation of the NAACP, that to us, even in this state of this is a great archaeological site, we felt this was nationally significant. And so we wanted further discussion about that, further investigation. And that meant that the transportation agencies and the rail engineers kind of needed to go back to the drawing board to figure out, can we move this rail line over even just a couple of feet to help us keep this archaeology in place? And I don't know if you have any archaeologists listening right now. It's a very, very interesting and very important kind of work, but it is a destructive work. It's a destructive work. You go in and you're there to collect data, and you can measure it. You can collect a lot of data, but once you start disturbing it and removing the things just become mute things in boxes and shelves, and you don't have the site anymore to learn from, or to see how small the house is, or how close it is to its neighbor's house. Or imagine standing there on the sidewalk and being able to look how just a few blocks away, not far at all, and you're at Abraham Lincoln's house, and to remove these things from this location, to remove it from the landscape, is to remove its power. And the power of that place is really important. So these discussions continued. The first thing that was really wonderful, and this happened literally the day that I moved to Syracuse. This event happened back home in Springfield, but the city created a commemorative Race Riot walk with these signs where you could follow the path of the rioters through the city and stop along the way and see the sites of violent acts, the site of the lynching of Scott Burton or William Donegan. I should say, and I want to say very clearly, William Hunter, this man, is a survivor. He was a survivor, I should say. He was lynched here and he was cut down. He was saved. He did not die, but he was meant to die. And I am always incredibly moved when I see this photograph. And I mean, I saw this place with my own eyes and I hope to see it again sometime. But just to say that, you know, it's a very powerful thing, this home of a survivor like that. And so it's really wonderful that the city of Springfield took this first step with the NAACP to create this sort of walking tour. It's really, apart from a Route 66 kind of car festival and local 5Ks and things like that, it's really one of the first things that the cities, CVB and whatnot are really doing to plug into a history other than Lincoln in that town. And it's amazing. You can go into their tourist offices. They have a website for the Race Riot tour. It's really quite, I think it's a positive first step. As painful as it is, I think it's a very important thing. It's a good thing. The other thing that has come out of this is that legislators, bipartisan legislators, Republicans and Democrats, have put forward a request that slowly is making its way through the process of just asking the National Park Service to consider, now that we're able to save most of these house foundations in place and keep this site together, and yet the train is still going to be able to go because we've been able to figure out a way to move it over. We'd like to create this as a national historic monument. And it's going through that process. The Park Service is reviewing, the historical background, the level of integrity, the condition of the archaeological remains, and then thinking about what they'll do. Of course, with this last election cycle and the change between administrations, this was put on pause, actually, but it has just been reintroduced just this month. So it's back on its way to be considered, and hopefully the site will be embraced by the Park Service and enter the National Park Service collection, if you will. I think it's a really important site. I'm very proud to have been a part of it. I, again, want to thank all my colleagues down there in Illinois. I think that, it was a rocky start, and in the end, listening to people and learning from them about what they see or what they always saw when others maybe didn't see it, didn't recognize it. I think it's really a benefit to everyone in this country, to be honest. I really hope that you're able to experience this at some point in the future. So that's one way of talking about invisible landscapes. But if I have time, and I think I have a little bit here, I'd like to talk more about you at Hanford Mills and talk about this process of writing history, local history, and what histories do we tell? What do we cherish or pay attention to? And again, this red arrow is really just a shout out. Hooray, Plainfield, Illinois made the landing page for the National Park Service's explanation of what is the National Register of Historic Places. So I guess you can tell I'm a little homesick, but what is it? What is this National Register? It's a list. It's just a list, but it's a list of what? Well, it's the official list of historic places worthy of preservation, and it's authorized by the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. So it's a federal process, and it's meant to make people feel good about their local history and where they live, and it can include buildings and structures like bridges, collections of buildings like this, a whole downtown, and as it says here, archaeological resources. But one thing that I want you to notice, another thing, for people who are like, and again, Christina was just talking about, don't tell me what to do, or this sort of libertarian or anti-regulatory stance that a lot of people have. For those of you out there who may not know the National Register of Historic Places, love it, please, because it doesn't tell you what to do. It doesn't really offer you any protections at all. And that's what's really shocking to people, is that they're always like, wait, it's on the National Register. I thought you can't tear it down now. You can list something on the National Register today and tear it down tomorrow. The only way that there's a regulatory hook for you is in the example of the railroad I was just talking about. we were lucky that people wanted to have that conversation and make another choice about what to do, because just saying, well, the train takes precedent and, we talked about it, that's enough. Let's just dig it up. That actually is a choice that you can make. And that is a valid legal choice, because those laws are process laws. You just go through the process and then you make a decision about what you want to do. So there really is no official protection. As it says here, local historic district designation offers the most legal protection for historic property. So if you have a local landmark in your village, in your town, in your county, that means more, or a state register. But the National Register is pretty much an honorific thing. So another way in which landscapes are invisible is within the National Register itself. And so I just wanted to show you that the National Register program, the Park Service, created this booklet to help people understand historic landscapes, which is a very nice thing. You can download it there, but it clearly states that it was 15 years after the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 that the Park Service said, wait a minute, we've got buildings, we've got collections of buildings, we've got structures like bridges or canals, Erie Canal, that's a structure. And then we have archaeology, but there's also stuff in between it, like landscape, what? And so we need to pay attention to that too, I guess. So they didn't recognize landscapes really as a thing until 1981. So this kind of presents a problem. In the sense that if you look, and this is where I'm going to get a little bureaucratic wonky, but that's where I came from, right? Public servant. So you can see that there are these different categories to list something on the National Register: buildings, districts, site, that's for archaeology, structure, bridge, like I said, or a dam. And then object is usually a work of art. So you check the right box, who owns it, blah, blah. Is it part of the district? Is it not? But there's no landscape. So what are you going to pick? What are you going to pick? Let's look at the next page. We'll see what we're going to pick. Notice here that, well, you could say a city park with a small fountain. Maybe you want to list that as a site. But wait a minute, a site is usually for archaeology. Should the city park be a district? I don't know, because this next page kind of says maybe it should. Because what's a site? Well, it could be a habitation site, that's archaeology. It could be funerary sites, rock shelters, so that's all archaeology. But then wait a minute, a landscape could also be a site because it could be gardens, grounds, battlefields, ruins of historic buildings, campsites, sites of treaty signings, trails, areas of land. What is that, area of land? Designed landscape, so that means it could be Central Park, like Olmsted, woo, it's a biggie. Cemeteries, there's a lot of stuff there. But then you could also list a landscape, I suppose, landscape as a district. Well, what would that be? A college campus, your central business district, downtown, residential areas, commercial areas, a large fort. You have a lot of choices here. Rural villages. So you have a lot, industrial complexes. So district. A district applies to multiple things: large acreage, large farm, neighborhood. So it's a little confusing. So some people might say, the National Park Service guidelines, the regulations are very free and they don't tell you what to do, and they are open to interpretation. You could list it as either, but I would say it would probably be really helpful if they just actually made a landscape category. Then let people have this debate. Well, so my battlefield, I guess, is a site, but this designed landscape, is Central Park a site? I don't think so. But anyway, so I was part of a panel at the National Conference on Public History in 2019. And with the other participants on this panel, we came up after the conference with a series of blog posts on their website. And 3 of the panelists wrote this really nice entry that just mentions that history is always open to interpretation and debate. And I think that's very important. And it's about conversations, continuing conversations. It's a dynamic process of interpretation. But then it also says, so National Register nominations themselves are living documents that can and sometimes should be amended or changed because meanings change. So I wanted to put that bee in your proverbial bonnet here. And then another panelist wrote another entry that was basically, it's a little more technical, like some of the blah blah I was just talking about with checking this box and counting that number of stuff. But basically down here, I wanted to call your attention around here. Many preservationists view the National Register as the untouchable bastion of the field, and taking on amendments to old nominations seems impossible. But National Register nominations are not set in stone. They should be viewed as dynamic documents that can be updated or expanded over time as new themes and contexts are revealed through additional research, or as more recent events reach the 50-year threshold for nomination. And I want to say that the 50-year rule is something that is a number that they agreed upon back in 1966 that's actually quite arbitrary and meaningless. And you can list things in the National Register that are much younger than 50 years old. You just have to check a box, criterion consideration G, and then make the argument that supports checking that box, basically that the age is not really what it's about. It's about the event, what happened there, or what continues to happen there. So, and then I was part of this group where we were just talking about underrepresented communities and physical integrity, and how we wanted to suggest that people amend and update nominations that often focus on the design or the aesthetics of what the thing looks like. You know, what is it? What do you see? Does it have enough integrity? And oftentimes, is it pretty enough? So in thinking of Hanford Mills, which is an industrial site, you know, was it pretty when you decided to make it a museum? Is it prettier now? Does that matter? How much of it is original in quotation marks, and how much of it is reconstructed? Because you can have reconstructions, you can have rehabilitations. There's all different kinds of categories of properties that you can list. But I just wanted to emphasize down here, as we did in our post, and John Sprinkle is one of the great historians working in the National Register program for the Park Service. And he wrote here, and this is true, no one would expect a history textbook from the 1960s to reflect the current narrative of American history without significant revision. But the fact is that only 3% of the 90,000 listings on the National Register have ever been updated for content. And we felt, especially when writing this piece, that it's important to think about communities whose history was never recognized because it was never pretty enough, or because it was always challenged, or because communities were forced to pick up and run, or because of urban renewal. There's all kinds of reasons and ways why certain resources may have been excluded from this process in the past, and now it's time to include them. And so this article was, again, talking about how you can have community meetings that are more collaborative and trying to get local buy-in from residents and say, you know, your history matters, your story matters, and getting the community to come together to tell its story. So I just wanted to put that out there. There is, again, very bureaucratic, boring process, but this is here for you to read to help you update your nomination, and why you would want to do that. Has your property boundary changed? Or is it just something as simple? Look at this, individual significance, increase boundaries, decrease boundaries, reclassify, gain approval to move. You want to change a property's historic name. Well, what does that have to do with you? You know what? A lot, because your nomination was written in 1973. And these are the photos. And this one is blurry, though you can't really see it very well. It's not even in focus. And I know you are doing a great job at your museum, and you have a lot better pictures to share. And this is the official federal record of your property. Ta-da! That's it. It has 4 photos. 4. And it's very nice. But this form is very different from the forms I just showed you, which are more current. So there's fewer boxes to check. And again, I'm not advocating being a box checker. There's more to life than that. But so you're nominated as a district. Public acquisition was being considered. That's not even a box anymore. Preservation work in progress. You can still talk about that. But your property is, this is Kelso Mill. Kelso Mill is in the national. You just told me, I thought I was invited to Hanford Mills. That's what I thought. But so your nomination is for Kelso Mill. And then the first sentence just begins with the Hanford Mill. Today, this wouldn't fly. If you had people at the desk, you know, in Washington, D.C., or in your state historic preservation office in Albany, they'd be like, you need to revise this a little bit. It's a little, you're mixing your metaphors here. Another thing I would say is that it's just not a very thorough description. So the section 7 is called the description section, and it's like when a student says, well, how long does my paper need to be? It doesn't need to be long at all. You can be very brief about this, but I would have to say that as complex as your site is, with as many buildings as you have, I don't think that 2.5 pages cuts it. It's just not enough description and not enough attention. And you have an unpublished article here that you're citing, and then this. And you probably have more resources now. You have original documents that you found. You probably know a lot more or have more access to data. I can't say with any authority about this, but I'm guessing because you have a very successful and popular and beloved museum. What is it listed for? 19th century industry, architecture, but are there any other things? Is there an indigenous history that you want to talk about or address or recognize to this area? Are there other reasons of social history? Did Hanford Mills have something to do with your local economy? Should you check a box for economic development, or is there something else? And again, your statement of significance is relatively condensed, very, very short. These days, when you list a property, you have to state a period of significance, and you don't. And I think Kisa mentioned, it was established here, and then it grew through like 1890, or that was its peak period. Well, so does your period of significance have to be called out with an end date with it? But it's something to think of. So I know I'm speaking quickly, and I know my time is up, but your bibliographic references are pretty thin. And again, this isn't a dissertation, and I'm not advocating that it is. What I'm saying is that you know so much more. I'm looking at 3 historians here, 4. Christina is an artist historian, but you can do better than this and make your federal record better. Should you? That's for you and your board to decide. But I want to say that you might want to do something with this Kelso Mill nomination. Here's your map, which was included then. And just look at this, look at Mill Pond for a second. So this looks like so this was 2 sheets that were kind of like cut together, but look at the shape of that pond, and then look at your website. It's a little different. It's a little different. So it's just something you might consider. Again, because your website is beautiful. This could be a great project with Will's students or Kisa's students, with anybody's students. This could be a great community building and community engagement project. I mean, there's so many opportunities here for you to make this a thing, to explore the power of the past, as it were. So I would say that your nomination is not powerful, and it doesn't inspire exploration. And again, it's done. Like, you're listed, and you don't need to do this. You do not need to do this. I'm just saying it could be pretty great, actually. It could be pretty great if you wanted to do that. So maybe you want to think about that for the future. If there's some way that I can help you, help your students, we'll take this on. And if you're just like, hey, you're a box checker, how do we make the best argument to check the box? I'm happy to help you. But you can find information on how to do this, how to amend a nomination at the National Trust as well. Jim Gabbert. So actually, I'm calling this to your attention because Jim Gabbert used to work at the State Historic Preservation Office in Oklahoma, and he's now with the Park Service in DC. And there is a video here. If you visit this website where you can hear him talk about the National Register and the process of updating a nomination and why you would want to. And then the last thing I'll say, and then I am going to stop so we can have this conversation, is update your damn Wikipedia page. And I don't mean to swear at you, except to say, look at your page. You've got a dammed up mill pond. Well, if you're damming a river dam, that's D-A-M-M. You're damming it. You're not damming it, damn it. That's not what you're doing. I apologize. I don't mean to swear at all. I really don't. I'm just saying this is what fix this. Okay. And also, what is your name? Are you Hanford Mill? Are you Hanford Mills? Do you want this to say Hanford Mills Museum? Because the fact that this is Wikipedia, yes, it's moderated. Yes, there are editors. Yes, but you can change this. You have the authority to do that. This is a crowdsourced thing. That's the nature of the wiki. You could do this tonight. You could do this right now. So anyway, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. And I thank you for letting me be here. Let's talk. Let's talk about stuff.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Christina and Rachel, Dr.
Yeah.
Leibowitz.
That's great.
So much to chew on here. I took many pages of notes, furiously scribbling and then highlighting at the end. I think it might make sense to start our conversation by talking about one of the goals that we discussed in the process of developing this series, which is how can we advance conversations and support actions around environmental justice, which includes racial justice in rural communities, right? So how can Hanford Mills advance these conversations and support these actions around environmental justice? And one of the things that I heard kind of connecting both of your presentations was the importance of ways of seeing and looking closely, and through that figuring out how to talk about these difficult things, both from the past and the present. I wrote down some things you both said. Sometimes it's invisible and sometimes we're not seeing it. It's there, it's present, but we're just not seeing it. And Christina, your wonderful quote from your teacher, look longer than you're supposed to. I'm going to steal that. That's great. These things, the things that you talked about, Rachel, in Springfield that were invisible to some, but many in the community had not forgotten, right? They were not invisible to those people. And another line, Christina, that resonated with me is the beauty and the ugliness in our rural culture. And we have both of those things in spades. So I know we have some questions in the Q&A, and I think I see some things coming in the chat as well. But I wanted to start by asking both of you to talk about your process of seeing and looking a little bit more. So maybe Christina, you could start with that.
Ooh, it's interesting. It's a very, I just dig into a lot of information that is related to the topic that I'm focused on. And then it's pretty organic, I would say, and things just kind of stick to me. And then I say, oh, that's something I need to keep following. That's interesting. And I just keep researching, or, you kind of like put intent into an idea. And I think that it just kind of starts appearing a little bit more naturally over time, and seeing becomes easier. And so I'd say that like, it starts with a lot of research and a lot of just looking around and a lot of not being afraid to like look at things I'm not supposed to look at, or that seem like they're not very important. When I was going to the Delaware County Historical Association, I asked them, I said, hey, what do you have on like race and Blackness in Delaware County? And they're like, well, we've got this box that this woman Shirley had like started doing research, and it's not organized in any way. And you can go through it. Like, I don't know if you're going to find anything. I'm like, I don't even know what I'm looking for. Right. And so I just started going through everything. And, it was obituaries. It was certain articles. It was certain people that, Black people that lived in Delaware County that I was attracted to, and then I'd follow their story. And then like, you know, a symbol might make sense or have to be inserted into a video or something, you know, like some kind of saying. So that's my process pretty much.
I would say that for all of us who do curate or care for the built environment, a lot of us come from this education or training in material culture, whether we are archaeologists or we're curators of stuff, archivists. And for me as a landscape historian and an architect as well, you know, we were trained to really look at the object and the thing and to think about its style and what's it made of, and, you know, and to kind of analyze it in a stylistic way and in a physical way. But these other things that we're talking about in terms of invisibility aren't necessarily there and easy to see. You just have to dig in and do research and ask questions. I'm thinking of an example when I worked in the State Historic Preservation Office at Texas, and there was a community that wanted to list its movie theater, which had the most amazing marquee and the most amazing neon, huge, tall. It was the tallest thing in this teeny tiny town. And they did a very nice job with describing it. But as I was looking at the nomination, I said, you know, just the front of the building is so interesting because it's asymmetrical in a way you wouldn't expect it. You've got these pairs of doors in the front under the marquee, and then you've got this door off to the side. I was just asking. I'm looking as a person looking at style and, you know, it's asymmetrical. That seems unusual. What's going up? And they said, oh, well, that's the colored entrance. And I said, I'm glad I asked, because now you need to write about that. Now you need to include that in this nomination. And they're like, oh, you know, we don't want to. And I was saying, that's really something you need to do. You need to. And so it really is just kind of sometimes looking at something and being like, huh, why is that? And just ask someone and they'll tell you. And if no one will tell you, then you just kind of keep digging. But it can sometimes just be as simple as asking yourself what you're seeing. It's not about how to look, but just what am I seeing? Am I seeing enough? Am I seeing everything? And I think too, we don't look at the spaces in between the buildings as much as we look at the buildings or these other things. And a lot of action, a lot of really important stuff happens in the spaces in between. That's where we live. We live in these spaces in between. So that's what I would say.
Great. Okay, so let me pull some questions here from the Q&A. The first comes from Jessica Fleming. How do Christina and Rachel's experiences they are speaking of intersect? So were there ways that when you were listening to one another, you saw your experiences intersecting? Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say, you know, I have an art background as well, and I'm very appreciative of Christina's method and what she's doing, but it didn't occur to me until tonight when you were presenting your slides. I don't know why I didn't think about this when we were speaking a while ago, but there is a sort of a cultural critic or a cultural historian kind of based in geography who wrote a book, I don't know how popular it was, in the 1960s, but it's called The Beer Can by the Highway. And he has a whole essay about how the beer can by the highway is really, that is what is essential about American culture. Like there's nothing more American than that. His name is John Van Coenhaven. I can get you the citation or whatever. But as you were presenting, I was like, there's nothing more American than what Christina is talking about. That is it, baby. And so I just thought, you know, whether you want to get into that kind of writing or just looking at that place. I mean, I love that you're calling these collections of cans an archive. I love that. and that you're naming them for the place, and that it is a sort of it's a stand-in for the place. You name it for the road or whatever, and it's like, that's what that is. That's that experience, and that is evidence of the people. I just think that's fantastic. I love the work. I think it's really great.
Something that struck me was the erasure in your work, Rachel, or when you were talking about the lynching site, the erasure of like Black people like through physical force, and then in my work, it's like the erasure through using symbols or like being unwelcoming to kind of like keep Blackness out. And it's just, you know, again, very American. And that was something that struck me during the conversation. Different methodologies, I guess.
Doing it over and over again, whether through urban renewal policies or, hey, it's like, hey, we've had this thing hidden underground for decades and now we can get rid of it through this high-speed rail project. And the benefit to that community is more important than the benefit to this community, or, you know, it's very problematic and ongoing, this kind of erasure.
And it's interesting to me, Rachel, that you bring up that book, and you know, the idea of the microaggressions Christina talked about, and the environmental kind of justice roots of this conversation. I guess, you know, on a whole different level, we have these microaggressions against our environment. You know, Christina, I certainly am not at all negating the microaggressions you're talking about, but you go back to that book in the 60s and the campaign in the early 70s of the crying Native American with the litter. And today, as we are trying through this series to really get people to think about our daily microaggressions, individually and culturally, in so many ways, with respect to natural resources and in our environment and our communities and our neighbors, and how do we draw attention to that and become a more equitable and just community.
Yeah, I want to make sure we have another question here in the Q&A. This says from Ginny Shearer, Rachel, could you expand upon the importance of considering the social use and meaning of historic properties, and how can their consideration help make the invisible visible? Big question.
I have to read it. I'm sorry. Expand upon the importance. I just think that the National Register, and again, it's a list, and you don't need to nominate something in order for it to be significant. But I think that you know, we may be expanding our ideas of the histories that we want to share and include, and it's long overdue. But I feel like we barely made a dent in this, and we're still privileging sites that may have had greater care, greater monetary investment over time, and just sort of privileging the stories of the powerful. We're still doing that. And there's been just a lot of movement this summer after George Floyd's murder. I mean, frankly, I don't need 50 years to pass for me to know that that site in front of Cup Foods is a critical site in American history. I don't need to wait 50 years. I don't need to wait 5 years. The National Register might say, "Mom, we need to wait." But, you know, I don't know, do we? Can we have a conversation and talk about that now? So, you know, we need to expand our ideas about what is eligible for listing. And part of that is, you know, what are the stories worth telling? And stories are rooted in places. But the power of place sometimes goes beyond, again, what you can readily see. I think we just need to invite more people to the table to have these conversations. If you go to a meeting and you don't really feel like there's adequate representation, well, where are the other people? Where are the other people who would know something about this? Have we invited everyone? Have we included everyone who might have an investment in this place? Spiritual investment, an intellectual investment, knowledge. I just feel like we can do a lot more with that. And so I would hope that your students and younger people listening to this will sort of take up that charge and help us make that happen. There was a really great historic preservation conference this summer online that I think you can find clips of or whole content that was called Dismantle Preservation. That was actually saying specifically this, like, where is Sikh history in the National Register? Because actually Sikhs have been in this country for a couple of centuries now. So why don't we have more Sikh properties? Or, you know, it goes beyond the ones that we're kind of familiar with, like Japanese internment camps, but it's more, let's have more that's really celebrating Japanese culture in the United States, or more that's, you know, it doesn't have to be these monumental things that we all agree are worth talking about, right? And I think the power of history is local. It's local. And local people know their history best, and those local stories mean as much or more than these national stories. And they're very powerful. So I have no idea if that answered the question.
I think it did. You know, and I think you're you know, talking about this real paradigm shift in how we think about historic preservation and historical significance. And that is tied to social changes, right? In our contemporary society, right? That these things are inseparable. So the past and the present, the past is informing the present, right? In a more direct way, or helping us to work through our present in more constructive ways. So I want to give the last word. I think we've addressed all the questions that have come into. Christina, if you wanted to add anything to this conversation around rethinking historical significance.
I do want to say that as you were speaking, Rachel, that I think a lot of times those seemingly like those sites that might be of great significance aren't always noticed for that. And being able to, I think, find ways to nurture that kind of appreciation of one's community and to look and to, I mean, and ask questions and ask people, you know, just really listen to the stories.
And just to refer back to you, I would say that, you know, we all would do well to listen to your teacher who, you know, to look longer, I think is so important. That's a really important thing. And again, for Hanford Mills, just if you do want to amend your nomination, there's a rich labor history that has to do with economic class. You're talking about rural history, you know, who labored here, who benefited from this place, the environmental resources, you know, that were taken or replanted, forests, you know, I mean, you have a lot that you could unpack here. And you might find that there are a lot of different significant stories that you would like to add that get into issues of social justice and environmental justice, because I'm sure there were a lot of very interesting issues here with labor, paid and unpaid. And again, was the site, does it have an Indigenous history way back? And is that something you want to include? But these are things to consider. I don't know those answers, but you do, and you can decide what you want to do. But I would just recommend thinking about it and making it more expansive.
And it's so interesting because as an organization, we certainly have a very dynamic interpretive plan that addresses a lot of what you just mentioned. So we think about moving forward with the conversations and not particularly going back and updating the National Register nomination, but it does certainly make us a more multifaceted property in that official nomination and on that record. So it makes a lot of sense.
Great. Well, I think we've hit our time. And so I want to thank both of our presenters for wonderfully rich, thought-provoking presentations, all the wonderful images that you showed, and lots for us to work on. So hope we can work on it together.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. And thank you, Will. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one.